It's such a I can't express like enough. It's such a personal job because you're taking these people and their story and you're amplifying it. And if you amplify the wrong thing or you amplify something that they don't want amplified, that can be disastrous.
Welcome to BPM, Behind People in Music, the podcast where we go beyond the stage, past the headlines, and straight into the real stories of the people who make the music industry run. I'm your host, Nate Abrahams, a senior at Indiana University and an executive member of the Business of Music Club here at IU. I started this podcast because I wanted my generation to get access to the kind of conversations you never hear in the classroom or on TikTok. Real, unfiltered conversations with the people who have been there, done it, and are still shaping the music industry. Today, I'm talking with Ashley White, a longtime music publicist, strategist, and storyteller who's led campaigns for artists like Jason Mraz, Neon Trees, Halestorm, and many others. She's the founder of Ashley White Public Relations and previously spent 15 years as VP of Publicity at Atlantic Records. What makes Ashley's work so special is how intentionally she helps artists express who they are, not just promoting music, but shaping the stories that build real connection and trust. By the end of this episode, you will walk away with three things: a clear understanding of what publicity actually is, how storytelling and identity drive long-term careers, and practical advice for artists and young professionals trying to break into the industry. So let's get into it. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining the BPM podcast. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Nate.
Yeah, well, I am excited about this episode. I think it's very different than what we've done before, and I'm excited to get your perspective on some of these issues I think that I haven't been able to touch on yet. So I want to start out a little to help our viewers, I think, and to help, start out the beginning of the podcast. I think maybe most people see PR or public relations maybe as something about or only about hype or attention. And I want, to hear from you who have built a career on depth and authenticity and honesty. What to you is a publicist?
Well, I think you hit on something very important right there. For as many different artists that are in the world, there's as many publicists too. And there's probably more. I don't know. That could be debatable. But this is a very personal job. I think one of the most important components is that the fit between the publicist and the artist. There are PR campaigns and publicists who focus on hype. And I mean, hype is, let's be real, hype is part of the music industry. And, we talk about building awareness. Well, that's hype. It's the same thing. But I think, there are definitely artists who go all out and who have personas. And then there are artists who, are a little bit more quiet in the way that they are. But at the end of the day, I see our job as at least my job, the way that I choose to do this profession, is to really link fans with artists and maybe bringing awareness of those artists to potential fans that maybe they haven't even met yet. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and a lot of it depends on the particular artist and what's important to them and what their vision is. But I think, for artists coming up, it's when it's time to choose a publicist, it's very important to find someone who understands the vision you're trying to do and who feels like they're the one that can help achieve it.
Right. Do you, going off of, I guess, a little bit what you were saying, why do these stories and the importance of the publicists that you work with matter so much in entertainment and music? And, I think maybe sometimes the importance of the publicity of an artist can maybe outweigh, depending on where they are in their career, maybe outweigh the importance of their music, or the way that they push out their music. I think maybe the stories that are pushed out through to the public might be more important. And I'm curious why these stories and why the publicists are so important, matter so much.
I wouldn't say that the stories are more important. I think that, but I will say that I think sometimes these stories exist, and that's why these artists are artists. That's why they're writing music, and that's why they're creating, because they're creating based on their experiences. And let's face it, artists, we have artists in this world because they have a gift of taking their life and their experiences and who they are and turning it into art that we want to listen to, or that we want to look at, or that we want to dance to, or we want to sing along with. And I think one of the most important things I see, and the clients that I work with in developing that connection with fans, is telling who these people are. Who is this artist, and why did they write this song? What happened in their life that prompted this? Or what were they feeling when they wrote this? So many people, I think music is such a personal thing, and you can hear a song and you can hear the lyrics and you can immediately see yourself in that. And that's why I think the fan relationship deepens when you understand these creators and what happened in their life to prompt that.
Right. Is there a way to make those stories that are told by the artists more sticky, maybe, or a way for, everybody connects to music in a way that is on a very emotional level? And a lot of that is because of the storytelling, like you were saying, that is told by the experiences of these artists that are turning those experiences into an art.
Right.
And I'm curious, is there a way to better make those stories connect to people?
I mean, I think they have to find, I think just like the music, it has to find its audience. I think, I've worked with artists before who want to talk about mental health, who want to talk about depression, who want to talk about addiction. And the people who need to hear those stories, that's why I feel like your media plan is so important, because you need to find the right media outlet for these discussions and these opportunities to take place. And you're not going to reach everyone, because not everyone has experienced that and not everyone might relate to it. But when you do find a group of people who tune into this podcast because they suffer from depression, and they hear this person talking about it, and they listen to their music and say, oh my gosh, I can totally identify with this, that's where you find your fans. And I think, and we'll probably touch on this later, but the both, like, the mainstream, there is no really mainstream media anymore unless you're Taylor Swift or
Yeah.
Beyonce. Like,
Right.
there is no more. And so when you want to find your fans, you have to find your people. And it might not be all the people, but if I take something on, it's something I believe in. And if I believe in it, I have to believe that there's somebody else who can believe in it and relate to it. And I think that's where the storytelling comes in, and that's where your media plan comes in, is you're putting these people into places where they're going to be discovered by the people that you think are their potential fans.
Right. Do you ever face a scenario, I guess, where you are trying to help an artist maybe discover a story that they don't realize that they're telling through their music to better connect with their audience or maybe other audiences?
I mean, I think there are several different stories, or in the perfect world, there are several different stories for different artists. I have one band that I work with, and the lead singer will talk about depression, but she'll also talk about empowerment. She'll also talk about sexuality. And I think, sometimes it's different people who connect to those different topics. I have another artist that we just finished an album campaign on who first came up in the EDM world and was almost more of like a quasi celebrity type figure, had celebrity friends, but then switched into made a different kind of music and made it and really her goals as an artist and as a person changed. She had change in her life that prompted her music to change. And so, it was almost, it was like all of these other targets. Some of them came along with us, some of them didn't, but it's rediscovering, okay, what stories are we going to tell now? And so many stories came out of that. Stories again of abusive relationships, of working with people you trust, stories about, the way that she grew up, and so I think that's one of the things I love most about this job is meeting these artists, because I want to know, and I, like I said before, I always take on stuff that I truly believe in, that I'm a fan of, and I want to know what about this? Where did this come from? Why did you write this? Why does this sound so different than your albums before? And by asking those questions, you start getting these stories. And then when you start thinking about, who's going to connect with these stories, it might bring up other stories that might connect with other people.
Yeah. Do you see these kind of stories being similar or changing over time? So I mean, for example, stories being told through music about relationships or mental health or happiness or joy, I think maybe are common themes throughout certain genres of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, do you see these themes in music being similar or being similar throughout time or changing as we continue to develop as a society? And off of that question, how do you differentiate artists that maybe are trying to tell the same story?
Okay. I mean, I feel like I'd love to say that there's new themes popping up all the time, but let's be real. People write about love.
Yeah.
People write when they're sad. People write about sex. Like, these themes are never going to go away. These are basic human themes. And I also think that's one of the things, I have one artist that we just did a whole virtual PR day with South American media, and none of them spoke the language, but they all had so many questions for him, because music is universal, because it documents the human experience. So in that respect, you're always going to have the same themes. You're going to have the same themes that we all have in our lives. But, I think the difference is the circumstances around those change, and people have different stories and come to different conclusions and have different, I don't know. I want to know, like, oh, who are you talking about here that broke your heart? Or, what prompted this in your life? And maybe I'm just a nosy person.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like I think it's almost reassuring as a human to hear other humans tell you their stories that are similar but not the same as yours,
Totally.
Because you end up on the same emotion. You end up in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. I think you're right. These themes are so deeply rooted in humanity. And I think it's important to continue to feel those emotions. And I think it's important to feel them with other people, because when you do, I think it helps you feel better and it helps you connect to other people in your life. And so I agree. I think they're very important, and will stay. And I'm interested to see if more themes will arise or will affect us on a different level. So,
and I mean, sometimes, everything I've talked about thus far, I feel like it's very serious. Sometimes it's just having fun. Sometimes it's like just I mean, you know, Louie predated crazy TikTok videos. Like sometimes it's just about like this is ridiculous and I love it and it's a lot of fun,
Yeah,
and that's part of being human too.
right.
I mean, I
Um,
especially during the pandemic, you saw some of that.
oh
Like
my
people were
gosh, yeah,
just like, I'm just putting stupid stuff out there in the environment because I'm bored and it makes me laugh and I'm sitting in my house with nothing to do. And that was a shared human experience.
yeah. Did you see COVID affecting the way that um, artists are reaching their audience? I know TikTok became very popular, but I'm curious if that time where we were stuck inside and we were stuck in our heads and in a sad place, or surrounded by all these new changes and ways to find things funny and enjoyable, and if it changed in a positive way.
I mean, I will say some beautiful art came out of COVID because I think, everybody to an extent was depressed. Everyone was lonely, and that's what artists do. They take when there are strong emotions, they channel it into something. So yes, like and I think also like from a more practical standpoint, people realize how important live shows are.
Mm-hmm.
People came out back from COVID and were like, "Oh my gosh, I need to go to a concert. I haven't
Yeah.
seen a band play in so long."
Right.
So I think, I think I don't want to say a lot of good came out of COVID. That's terrible because it was a terrible time and a lot of people lost their lives. But it definitely created a shift, just like I think it created a shift culturally. It created a
Mm,
shift in music.
yeah. Well, I think that was a really great like rundown of publicity, and I loved hearing your perspective on a lot of these topics. I'd love to sort of learn more about where your perspective came from, and I know growing up in New Orleans with
Mm-hmm.
parents as musicians, and I'm curious how that sort of changed the way that you see how music is expressed, or how it's created creatively, and your background there.
Yeah, so both my parents were musicians. My dad, before I was born, was the musical director for the Platters, which was an old Motown group that was still going in the 70s. And he and my mom would tour with them and he would write all their arrangements. My mom was a singer. And so once I was born, music kind of became part-time for them. But we had a recording studio in our house, and then living in New Orleans, we would have everything come through. Like as a kid, we would have a Dixieland band recording in our recording studio. And I was just like, what is this music? Like, I don't hear this on the radio. So it really opened my eyes to different genres of music, to jazz, to Dixieland, to, living in New Orleans, there's gospel music everywhere, which to this day, like, I love me some real gospel music. Um, and so I think it, like, I really learned a lot about different genres, definitely at that age. And then, seeing my parents navigate the music industry was really, I think, that had a big influence on me as I grew up because I saw them struggling to get paid and people cheating them, and it grew into this as I got older, and I realized like I had a love for storytelling. And at first I thought, okay, maybe I'll be a journalist, but I kept seeing like, people try to tear down musicians, both in the industry and outside. And the more I saw that, I said, well, wait, I want to fight for these artists. I and granted, I guess in my experience now, I see it less as fighting than I did at that point, but I want to advocate for them at the end of the day. I want to help someone build what, like, I want them to find who they are, and I want to be on that train and help them build. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And yeah, New Orleans, I always say, like, I was who I was, and I moved to New Orleans when I was 6 years old. And New Orleans was like my third parent. It shaped who I am today in so many ways because it is such a beautiful patchwork of culture in so many ways. And I mean, at the end of the day, I don't take a lot of things too seriously because that was New Orleans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not life or death. Like we're just having a good time. And I always say in this industry, if you're not having a good time, you're doing it wrong. I will
Mm.
say that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So you brought this love or desire to advocate or fight for these artists to Atlantic, and you worked there as the head of publicity for 15 years.
I was not the head of publicity. I actually started as an assistant.
Mm.
And I was there. Yeah, I was there for almost 15 years, and I worked my way from assistant to vice president. But we had a pretty large department. I was not in charge, but at the same time, like I like to say I grew up there because
Yeah.
I found my mentor, which we need to talk about mentors. It's the way to go, and I really learned everything there.
Yeah. I'd love for you to expand on that and you know what you learned about artist development and maybe trust there, and then what led you to start your own PR firm.
So, okay, in terms of mentors, I always knew what I wanted to do, but I think that was the missing piece. That was the missing piece in my road to my career. And you know, I started at Atlantic under one head of the department. Pretty soon afterwards, a merger happened. Everyone got blown out. And eventually, once the dust settled, I got this new head of the department, and she was incredible. And she saw something in me, and God bless her, for whatever reason, she nurtured it. And to this day, like I learned everything from her. And I think it's so important because you can, you know, you have to work hard. You have to put yourself out there. There's so many things you have to do, but if you haven't, if you're trying to break into this industry and you haven't found a mentor, you like, it's so important because not only does that create someone to help you carve your path, but you learn everything. That's how I learned how to be a publicist. um and okay, sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Well, just you know the artist development and trust.
Oh, and trust. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So at one point when I was young at Atlantic and we were under Warner Music Group, Leor Cohen was in charge of Warner. And that was something that I think definitely was of the Leor school. Was it's all about the relationship with these artists. And that's something that was kind of impaled like in us. And it's so true. I mean, we would, you know, the label we had everyone's birthdays, and everyone would get, all the artists would get a birthday gift on their birthdays. And it was just that relationship. He taught us to that is the most important relationship. And you know, as I started taking on my own campaigns and roles, I saw how much trust some of these people you're having conversations with, some of these artists, they bear their life secrets on some of these albums. And here you are talking, you know, telling them you want to take it to media. The amount of trust that is involved in that process, I don't know if I could trust someone that much, but it's necessary. And I think you don't do the artist justice if you don't have a mutual trust with them, because I have to be able to say to my artists too, like, you know, "Ooh, I'm not feeling like there have been times when we've said like, this is not you. This is not you." And a lot of times it takes a lot of courage to be able to say that to someone who you know could fire you. But at the same time, I think, and not every artist wants to hear that, but I feel like that's where the key is, this mutual trust. You have to earn their trust, and then you have to leverage that to be real with them. And you have to be able to have real conversations and know that, that there's this rapport there, because it gets hard out there sometimes. And I've seen some artists in some really tough situations where I'm like, ooh, but we have to hold hands and get through it together.
Yeah. When you start out with a new artist and you are working on building that trust, where do you start, or how do you approach building a relationship from scratch to then get to that point of trust where you can tell them things that are hard to hear, and they can do the same for you?
It's hard. And honestly, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. And, I think a lot of times it's, a lot of it you need to have in-person time with your clients and with your artists, because you see how they operate. And it's not always possible, but I try to sit in on every interview that my artists do, not because I'm there like to jump in if they get a hard question or if someone asks the wrong thing, but because I need to hear how they think. Because eventually I need to be able to put myself into their head, to know, to make decisions, and to really lay a media plan out, because I don't ever want to pitch someone for something that would make them uncomfortable, or that they don't really want to do, unless I have a really solid reason behind it. So I think knowing your artist inside and out is important, and that takes time. So when you're starting out with someone, like I always, now that I'm on my own, I always do like a kickoff call with the artist. Like, and I have great relationships with my managers, but I want to talk at least a few times directly to the artist about what we're going to do, to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all on board and we're comfortable talking about this and we're not comfortable talking about that. And then, when they do interviews, when they do photo shoots, when they're doing TV appearances, I want to be there, because I need to know, I need to understand what's happening and who they are as a person. It's just so important. I can't express like enough. It's such a personal job, because you're taking these people and their story, and you're amplifying it. And if you amplify the wrong thing, or you amplify something that they don't want amplified, that can be disastrous.
Right. Yeah. So you've built this trust, and you have this very private connection with this artist where like you were saying, you're very close, and you're almost living in their head so that you can help them be the best version of themselves in private and to the public. And I'm curious, is there a line that has to be drawn between clients' privacy becoming public in a way that you're able to help the audience connect with them? And I'm curious where that balance is between protecting the client's privacy and also sharing enough of the client's private life, or the artist's private life, so that more of an audience can connect with them.
I mean, I think it comes down, I take the lead from the artist, from their comfort level. Sometimes they might be open to talking about something that's super personal. And sometimes they'll just say, well, I don't really want to get in the specifics of that. So we can figure out a way together as to how I can go out and pitch this story and what they're willing to talk about. And, that way I know, if I know my parameters, I can stay within them. So I think, but I always say, like, if we're having a conversation, just a conversation, me and the artist, and they're telling me a story, and it's relatively personal, I'll say, is this something that you're comfortable sharing? Like, is this something I can go out and pitch, or is this, and if it's off limits, it's off limits. Everyone has to have a private life. I really believe that. And I don't want to ever invade in my artists' private lives, because it's especially for someone who's in the public eye, it's necessary. So I think having that's just a respect factor for that. So it's all about following their lead and being respectful to them.
Hmm. Is there a mistake that you often see artists make? Maybe when they're earlier in their career, I would assume is where this happens more often, but a mistake in maybe giving away too much information or in a way that an artist tells their story that kind of affected their career or, a couple months.
I think sometimes people say like blurt things out and then it keeps coming back to haunt them. And
Yeah.
that's a hard balance because you always like, and the artists I work with for the most part want to be genuine, and they want to, like, if they're in an interview, they want it to feel relaxed. And certainly the journalist does, because they want to get as much information as they can. But part of media training I found with people who've never done media before is making them realize everything you are saying is on the record. And if there's something that you just want to say in passing that's not, you need to say this is off the record, because if you don't, it's going to show up, and I've had this happen.
Yeah.
And then you will never, you'll keep hearing about, like, it won't go away. It won't go. You can't put the genie back in the box. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that then? Once it's out, how do you reel it back in, I guess, the best that you possibly can, or create maybe another story that brings a different perspective?
There's a lot of there's a lot of different perspectives here. I don't want to get political, but I really think that a big communication strategy in our government right now is, if something controversial a story comes up, well, look over here. I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory. I think once something's out, it's out. For a lot of it, you have to let it run its course. But you know what, like if I have an artist who has news that's all over the place that they don't want to talk about, they don't do interviews for a while. They need to let it run its course and sit back. Or sometimes if you have to put out a statement about something negative out there, you say as little as possible, because you don't want more questions to arise. There's ways to try to minimize, but there's no secret scrub the internet remedy to something. Like, if it's out there, it's out there. And then you just have to decide what you're going to do next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no pulling it back.
Mm-hmm. I would love to move a little bit into more about what you do now, and about the leadership that you have in publicity, especially with your company, and also as the co-chair of Women in Music in Austin. And I'd love to hear, both about what that leadership role looks like at your company, and also under this Women in Music as well.
So I will say, not to beat a dead horse, but going back to having a mentor, I had several bosses before I had my mentor, and through them I learned the boss I did not want to be. And so I'm constantly in my company and in Women in Music referencing, like, this is what a leader is, this is what a manager is, at least the kind I want to be. So that's been very important to me. I think one thing I've learned that I learned through her is empathy, is that we are all human. We're all going to have tragedies. We're all going to have life events. We're all going to get sick. And that's the difference between hiring a human and having AI do something. And if you don't want to acknowledge that part of someone, then use AI. Like I have had, I know a lot of people within my generation have. I feel like the music industry is getting has woken up and is getting much more empathetic. But I know that when I was coming up and a lot of my peers were coming up, you couldn't go to the bathroom. You had to like sit and answer the phone. So you were chained to your desk. Like it it was not a nice place to be. But and so I think that we kind of grew up, and now that we're in charge, we're like, okay, no, that's not okay anymore. But I think that that's so important, is leading with empathy, leading number one, acknowledging that the people that work for you are human and they're going to make mistakes, and part of being a manager is coaching them through that. I make mistakes still all the time, but I've had to learn, like, okay, I really screwed that up. What am I going to do? How am I going to move forward? And so it's teaching those skills to the people under you too, and knowing that, like, if you have a death in the family, you can be gone and the world will keep turning, because you're a human being. I think that is so important in all leadership across industries, is acknowledging the people who work for you are people first. They're
Yeah.
not employees first.
Yeah. Do you see the continuing growth or rapid growth of AI affecting both leadership and the ability to maybe run a company with the same level of authenticity as before? And then also the way that AI is playing a role in publicity, and how fake news stories or fake videos are now being created
Yeah.
through these improving AI platforms. And so I'm curious, how AI now is playing a role in both of those things.
So I will say, like, in terms of I don't think from a PR, or at least from my perspective, AI is a tool. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that we have in our tool belt to help us, to help our mind get going, to help us draft something out quickly, to help us organize information. Like, if used the right way, the human, is in charge of it. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the authenticity needs to go away. I think it's like a word processor. Like, it's something that we can use. But at the end of the day, it needs to come from us. Like, I've had journalists tell me before, I can tell as soon as I start reading a pitch if ChatGPT wrote it. And I don't have ChatGPT write my pitches, but I might have them help me organize these thoughts a little bit, and then I'll rewrite it to make it sound like me. And I think that's fine. I think that's beneficial. I think that's moving. This industry is so much about keeping up with change, and you can't do things the same way you did them 5 years ago or last year. Like, it changes constantly. And if you don't change, that's it. That's the end of your career. So I just think it's another change, and it's another tool. But then in terms of fake news, that is a huge problem right now,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
That is, and I don't know what the answer is, other than saying, this video that looks like me is not me, this. And yeah, but it's very confusing. It's confusing to consumers, it's confusing to fans. Like, it's very confusing. And I think how I personally see the work that's needed right now, it's in supporting real journalism. And you know that's that has played a role, I wouldn't say in the rise of AI, but in the misinformation that's out there. It's not the only thing, but I think journalists are trained to know to find out what's real and what's not real, and to fact check, and to dig, and to look at sources. And when you have non-journalists reporting stories, you don't have that. So I think, it's more important than ever for us to subscribe to real news sources with real journalists working. And for me to be conscious of who I'm giving access to my clients to, like, is this someone who's going to, and a media outlet that's going to fact check this story? Because if it's not, I don't know if I want to give them, I don't want to give them my artist, you know?
Yeah. Can you give some of those platforms that you trust and know are, real people providing real information, both for me and the people listening to look into and make sure that, we're following the right sources?
I mean, obviously, I would say like the New York Times, the Washington Post. In terms of music, Rolling Stone still has fact checkers, thank goodness. But then I'll also say, Pitchfork is part of Condé Nast. So for better or for worse, they have to follow, I believe they have to follow journalistic standards, you know. And I feel, anything that feels a little bit gossipy or opinionated, that's a pretty good red flag. Like if it's, and granted, like, even music review, like, yes, Rolling Stone and Pitchfork are going to write review. Pitchfork's reviews are notorious for being brutal, but at the end of the day, like, I'm talking less about reviewing music and more about like reporting a story, and they fact check their stories,
Yeah.
And there's a lot more that I'm not mentioning. And just do your due diligence. And if something raises an eyebrow, that like, if it seems that like someone has an agenda, then they probably have an agenda.
Yeah. Right. So I'd love to move into more, I guess, advice. I think this has been amazing advice for any generation or anybody listening. And I'd love to sort of hone in on Gen Z for a minute,
Okay.
and about the rising leaders in the entertainment industry. And I'm curious for, if you're a young person trying to break into the publicity side of entertainment, interested in storytelling and connecting with artists on a deeper, more emotional level, like you mentioned, the importance of your network and the importance of having a mentor. Are there any other things that this young person can look into or learn about, or resources that they can use to set themselves up for a career?
I mean, if you're specifically interested in publicity, I would say read, read, because that's one of the first questions I ask people when I interview them. You know, where do you get your music, and what are you reading right now? Like both in terms of music and not in terms of music. Like our jobs are to put musicians within a cultural landscape. So you need to understand the culture in order to be pitching the music. I would also say if you're specifically trying to do PR, you need to know how to write. And this is going to make me sound like a real old lady, but you need to spell correctly. You need to write with correct capitalization and punctuation. This is the stuff that makes me crazy. And when you're communicating all day, sending pitches to journalists, it discredits you to not know how to write. So
Mhm.
I like when I was in college, I did this internship where I reviewed shows in New Orleans for at that point it was mtv.com. This was a very long time ago. But write for your school paper, write for your school magazine, read and write as much as you can, because that's what we do. That's what we do. We
Yeah.
write to journalists to propose stories, so they have to sound like stories and look like stories when we propose them, and then we have to read to know what we're pitching. We have to read all of these media outlets to understand who we're pitching to what. So read and write a lot.
Yeah. So you mentioned AI being a useful and valuable tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's boundaries, of course, and there's a specific line that you can and can't cross. But I'm curious what that line is now in publicity, when you have these stories, you do your research, you're reading and writing, and what correct grammar looks like, and what a good story looks like, but using ChatGPT to maybe help professionalize it,
Yeah.
or to, so I'm curious what your perspective on.
I mean, I know there are publicists who use ChatGPT to write their press releases. And like sometimes I might have them again, I can't even get started. Here, I'm going to put something in, start, and then I take that and then I can clean it up. It's almost like having a virtual assistant in that way.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm approached by different PR software all the time that's like, we'll customize your pitches to everyone and we'll send follow-ups every certain amount of time. And it's like, do you think these journalists don't realize that the AI machine is sending them all these emails? Like,
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
Like to me, there's a line. Like, it still needs to come from me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if something comes in my name to a journalist, it needs to sound like me. I don't want it to sound like a bot. Because
Right.
you know what happens? Delete. And sometimes if it is my name, it's still a delete. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's hard. We are sending pitches to people who get thousands of emails every day. And trying to rise above that is a real challenge. And I think even a lot of artists don't realize even people in the industry, I've had friends of mine who work in marketing or management or something say, yeah, I took on this artist and they don't have a budget for PR. So I started trying to pitch people. Wow, nobody responded to me. It's like, yes, I have days that go by that no one responds, but that is part of it. That is, you have to have a thick skin and you have to be creative and resilient, and you have to, okay, this isn't working. How can I reposition this and reframe it into something that might be appealing to this particular media outlet? It's rough out there.
Yeah. How do you approach differentiating yourself and these stories from the thousands of other?
Exactly. Thousands.
How do you?
I mean, trial and error is a lot of it. And also I think, the longer you do this, I know that this journalist at Rolling Stone likes this type of music. I know that this person prefers to receive music in advance this way and listens to it on the weekend. So I know to follow up on Monday. And that all comes with time.
Yeah.
Like the more you do this, the more you get to know the people you're pitching, and the more you see what's working and what's not working, and you kind of figure it out that way. But yeah. I always try to put myself in the shoes of the person I'm pitching to. Like, if I open your email and it's like, hi there, I have a really great artist for you, I'm gonna be like, delete. Like, yeah. Tell me why. And you got to get to it within the first sentence, because people don't have time. These people get thousands of emails,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The importance of understanding who you're talking to, doing your research on them.
So important.
Yeah. I think maybe that's something that I haven't heard of as much, and am developing a stronger, I'm trying to think of developing a stronger understanding of how important it is to really understand who you're talking to.
Yes.
And to put that, to prioritize understanding that at the top of the list when I'm reaching out to somebody, because like you said, understanding what kind of music they listen to, what stories they're interested in, when they read their emails or listen to their music. I think that's such an important point that a lot of people maybe miss out on when reaching out.
For example, Billboard closes their issues on Thursday, or at least they used to. I mean, it's been a while since I checked, but as a result, I never pitch them on Thursdays, or at least I try not to, unless it's something too super time sensitive. But when you know that someone's closing an issue, leave them alone. They got enough. They don't have time to look at your pitch right now, and it takes some time, especially coming out of college. I was like, oh, I'm this bright-eyed. Oh, I'm so excited. And it's like, and somebody might be nice enough to respond to you and say, I can't even look at this right now. I'm closing an issue. And you're like, oh, that was not nice. But you got to learn, like, that's just part of it. And you take that and you have to learn from it. Okay, I know not to pitch this person on this day. Um, and what else was I going to say? Yes. Okay. So another thing I will say is, if you're going to take the time to pitch someone, you need to go back and see what they've written and what they've done. Like, this, I know, is a pet peeve for so many media people. Like, I'd love to know if you would do a Q&A with my artist. Well, I'm the album reviews editor. I don't do a Q&A. I don't do Q&A. Like, you have to understand the context before you reach out.
Right. Yeah. And then I guess moving from publicity specific to artist specific, people in Gen Z, maybe, I think this kind of differs a lot from the professional world of the business side, because you're following a very different career path. And I think when you are an artist, your path to stardom is very different or sporadic than maybe a professional career in business would look like. But is there any advice that you have for an artist as far as, telling their story or connecting with their audience, maybe before they have, a PR firm to help them out? What is something that they can do to better tell their story?
So I worked with this band called Dexter and the Moonrocks last year, and I love them. They're fabulous. They're fellow Texans. And one thing that I thought that they did very well, that really ended up getting them the record deal, got them, like, everything that came after it. Not only did they fully understand the power of TikTok and algorithms, but the difference that they did was they took their own authentic voices and really infused it into, like, once they understood the algorithm, they would make content. And everybody hates the word content, but they would make videos and things that felt like them, like, felt like you were talking, like, that no social media person made these videos. These were coming straight from the band, because a lot of them I was like, "Ay," but that's what builds these relationships. Is that okay? Like, let's be real. We're living in the age of TikTok and social media. You have to understand the algorithm. You have to put the content in. There's no way around it right now. But you can't just be creating content to create content. You have to put yourself in it. And at the end of the day, that's what that is. This is a vehicle to directly communicate with your fans. And if you're not showing who you are in that, why are they going to follow you? Yeah, you might have one video that pops up on someone's feed and is real funny and but I know when you follow these guys consistently, like, you see them and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they said that, or and that makes you come back. So I think, yes, you want to play the game and be part of that, but you can't lose yourself in the process.
Right. Yeah. I think this part of our conversation ties really well into the last part of the podcast, where, I like to do a mini case study question and a legacy question. I think this ties really well into the mini case study question. So I'd love to continue it with this. So for the mini case study, let's say I'm an artist who already has some success, maybe a big hit or big, on some news channel or something. But now I'm entering a new chapter creatively. Maybe I'm not the same person I was when people first discovered me. And so I'm curious, how do you help an artist communicate that kind of evolution without rejecting their past or confusing their audience? Maybe TikTok or this kind of personable uh, platform like social media can have on this?
So I'm going to start this by saying I am not a social media expert. I like, but I love working hand in hand with the digital marketing and social media people on the projects I work on, because what we do is so closely intertwined, but it's a different skill set that I don't have. But I will say, one artist that I was thinking about earlier, who came up in the EDM world, she basically had she had a new kind of music, she had new things she wanted to talk about, and she started she does all of her own social media, well, for the most part. And looking at this, you see her and she's talking about these things on her social media, and so through that, I think in that PR campaign, it was most important for us to put her in situations with earned media where she could talk about the things she wanted to talk about, the things that happened in her life that led up to wanting to talk about all this. So rather than go back to these outlets that covered her before, we found all new outlets that were, more based around the things she wanted to talk about. She basically, she wanted to be talk all about sexual empowerment, sexual freedom. She grew up in the club scene in Sydney and wanted to talk about strippers and sex workers and what their lives are like, and when you come up in one style of music and you're seen in one way, those people didn't necessarily, not all of, most of them, but I wouldn't say not all of them, but most of them, they had no interest in talking about these things. So you have to go and find, it starts on your social media. That's always your first line of this is who I am. It's there on your social media because you control that. Once you're ready to move forward and go beyond what you control, because you don't control earned media. That's one of the biggest differences, is that, people will say to me, well, can I read this story before it publishes? No, you cannot. That's not journalism. So, we had to take her to, more niche outlets that wanted to talk about these things, outlets that wanted to talk about lives of sex workers, or that wanted to talk about, the importance of sexual empowerment for women, or, mental health, and how mental health and owning your sexuality are so intertwined, and a lot of times it's niche stuff. A lot of times we're digging up podcasts that talk about these topics, or, little, even influencers that talk about these things, influencers are a gray line. I don't know if I even should have brought that into this conversation, but we'll talk about it if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to expand on that a little bit.
So influencers are tricky because a lot of it is paid. And this is where I think having a really solid relationship with the other people on your marketing team, we're all pieces of the same marketing puzzle, earned media, which is what I do, digital marketing, and digital ad buying, digital budgets to do, paid media. And so some influencers fall into paid media. I try to seek out for my clients influencers that either we can do collabs with, that we can bring on stage at a show. I work with an a cappella group, and here in Austin, there's a big influencer who's big in the theater performance type space. And he came out to a show and they filmed some videos together and he came on stage. That kind of stuff we will include in our PR plans. But, anything paid, I like to run through the larger marketing because it's just a whole different animal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'd love to move into our last question, the legacy question, focusing more on you and the career that you've built and are continuing to build. So when people look back at your career and the artists that you've supported, what do you hope that they say about the work that you've done?
That's a really good question. I think for me personally, I have seen how telling stories can change people's hearts and minds. And I think right now we live in a society that where everyone thinks they know everything, because when they go online, they all of the news they get corroborates what they think, and they surround themselves with people who agree with them. And I think when you can read someone's story and know that, you know, it's different. You know, if you hear someone's story about, I've worked with artists who talked about being first generation Americans, or I've worked with artists, several artists who are members of the LGBTQ community, some who had to leave their church in order to be who they are. And when you hear their stories, it's heartbreaking. You imagine what it's like to be someone's son or someone's brother who can't acknowledge who they are. And I think, music is the entry point. And when you start hearing these stories and when you start feeling these emotions that you feel when you listen to music, you see things so differently. And that's really what I hope for. I hope that people say she did a little bit of good in the world, and she changed some people's minds, and she made some people feel not so lonely because she helped these stories from these artists be told,
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think that is a perfect end to this podcast. I really appreciate you coming on. I feel like this was, I learned so much, and I feel like this.
I hope so.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
I babble.
Well, I feel like this conversation is very valuable for, especially in today's world. I mean, we covered a lot of things that I think are very important to understand and learn about and continue to develop now. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective on those things.
Well, thanks so much, Nate. I enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, very glad. Talk soon.
Okay.
Bye. If you're listening right now and you learned something new, do me a favor, share this episode with a friend, leave a comment, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. We've got some incredible guests lined up from every corner of the industry, from artists to managers to executives, and I promise every episode will give you insights you can't get anywhere else. This has been BPM, Behind People in Music. I'm Nate Abrahams. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.